but I have a couple of polls just to better understand who's on the webinar and what your history is with Office Lean. So Victoria, could you launch the first poll? And if people could let me know, in your organization, what is your role? And if you could select either board member, executive director, or management, or staff or volunteer, that way I can get to know who's on the webinar a little better. And like Victoria said, at any time feel free to chat a question in, or if you're having technical difficulties you could also raise your hand and Victoria can work to assist you. We want you to get everything you can out of these webinars. It looks like we have the majority of people are executive directors and management, 73%, 23% staff or volunteer, and 7% board member. Thank you so much. And now let's launch the poll quickly about what is your previous knowledge, or how much do you know about Office Lean? And I've given you 3 choices there as well. Okay, this is great. Most people either have heard the term or know the basic theory, but they're not real familiar, which is great because if you're real familiar with Office Lean, this would be a little boring for you. So those of you that have voted, you're in the right place. So let's see, in your organization, do these things sound familiar? Because these are some things that I've heard, and actually even staff will attest that things that I've said to myself or to our team. It's a lot like capacity building or building your infrastructure in your organization. Some of the time you just have to stop and take time to make improvements. And so one thing I often hear, well, if we had more money, or if we had more, more volunteers. If you had more money or more volunteers, would that just exacerbate your problems or highlight your inefficiencies, or could it really take you to the next level? And I'm a huge believer in Office Lean because I love this quote that you have to be good at being small before you can be good at being big. So even if you were to get an influx of money, would that really help propel your organization as forward as it could be if you're not as efficient as you could be? And so the benefits of Office Lean, that it's been proven, because this is a theory that has been practiced for many, many years, but it increases your employee satisfaction and volunteer satisfaction. It increases customer satisfaction, which includes, when you think about it in your organization, it could be your customer or your clients or funders, which is important, and or your board members. You reduce your administrative costs, which mean you have more money going to programs, and it helps accelerate new either employee or volunteer or board member training and orientation. And Lean applies to many different areas in our organizations. And when I say client intake, it could be a new client, a new customer. Some organizations need to check them in or fill out paperwork, those types of things. And then you use that data for reports. And special event fundraising. Lean can help that be more efficient. Scheduling volunteers. Especially when you're hiring a new employee or you're accepting new volunteers, or again, your board member orientation, making sure that you have effective evaluation of your programs, and even managing things such as office supply, or if you're a child care provider, thinking about what toys or curriculum do you have and when do you need to replace those, or do you have too much? If you have too much supplies, then that's money that could have been used towards programming. And so really a process is a process is a process, and Lean applies to processes, and it really looks at the process versus the people. So it's not a set of tools, and it's not about people. It's not saying, well, if I have better employees, our organization would be better. It's a methodology. It's a proven theory, if you will, to really take a look at the processes and enable the results. It becomes a way of thinking or a culture within your organization. So to better understand Office Lean, let's look at the history. And it actually started way back, I don't even remember the year, but Seikichi Toyoda saw his mother weaving on a loom, on a manual loom in Japan many, many years ago. I want to say the early 1900s. And as he watched her work so hard, he thought, there's a better way to do that. So he developed a thing that would automate the loom part going back and forth, the big board back and forth. But then his mom still had to deal with the, whatever it's called, that goes back and forth, the left to right. And so then him and his son were looking at that, and they were able to invent a way to have that be automated. And long story short, eventually they created an automation for weaving looms where one person could oversee many machines instead of one person doing it manually without any automation, or one person to one machine, because they still had to oversee all the machines. So that's led to production lines, and as we know with Ford and the assembly line and that type of thing, then they started looking at lean manufacturing, and from manufacturing it has gone into offices and looking at office systems as well. It's been fine-tuned over 5 generations of the Toyota family. And in the weaving loom, you see one of the pillars is between weaving loom and production lines is JIT, and the other is JIT, which is just in time. So JIT basically means automation with a human touch, and that's a very important principle, because even though the Toyotas were able to help their mom with automation on her weaving loom, and it was several machines for one human, the key to JIT is that, yes, machines do a lot of the work, but at any given time you have the human element, because JIT's theory is if a person sees a defect, anyone is able to stop the process, stop the production lines, so that a defect doesn't get passed on down the line. They stop and fix it right there. So it's power to the employees, if you will, the ones that are on the shop line. And then that transitioned into lean manufacturing and the just-in-time inventory principle that is so popular today. And as I mentioned, it's also coming into workplace processes. Really, in Office Lean, there are 2 very, what seemingly simple, but actually very complex theories. One, you want to identify waste, and then you want to eliminate that waste. And so it sounds really simple. And actually it's a lifelong journey. Remember I said it becomes a culture within the organization, and even in your own personal lives you'll start to see areas where you can be more efficient. And so if we're identifying waste and eliminating waste, then what is waste? Another way to say waste is that you look at it, is it a value-added activity or not? Then you say, well, how do you know if something's value added? And the directions, excuse me, information's on the screen, but it's also, think about this, if you had to do that activity twice, would the customer pay twice for it? So that's the value added activities, whether you are accepting a new child into your child care center, whether you are conducting an evaluation of a program, it's, what is it value added? And then of course non-value added are the activities that take up your time and resources, but it doesn't contribute to the product or service. It doesn't contribute to helping your customers or your clients with the services that you provide. And so obviously if it's not value added, then you call it waste. Another way to look at it, because this principle, identifying waste and understanding what waste is very, very important. And so the value added, here's a great way to think about it. If you stopped doing it, would your external or your end customer complain? Or would your funder complain? Or would your parent complain? And if yes, then it's value added. So then pick an activity, and if you stop doing it, and maybe you want to do this in theory and not reality, but if you were to stop doing it, would anyone, internally or externally, would they know the difference? And if not, then it's probably not a value-added activity. In other words, it's most likely waste. But then I'm sure some of you are thinking, like I was thinking, well, what about things that such as creating data for a report to give to a funder, the number of clients we've served, or an evaluation of our program. That doesn't seem like it's something we're required to do. Or here's a great example. Doing the bookkeeping so that you are able to keep track of your finances and make payroll, paying taxes. That really doesn't seem to have anything to do with delivering services, but you obviously have to do it. And so that's a category where we say it's not value added, but it's necessary. It's required. If you stop doing it, would an internal customer complain? Yes. You know, if you stopped paying your taxes, the IRS would come after you. If you got messed up with payroll, your employees would be very unhappy. If you didn't collect the data when it came time to create your grant report, that would be extremely frustrating and most likely not accurate, and you may be in jeopardy of losing that funder. So there's finding waste and eliminating waste, but when you think about waste, you have to look at, is it not necessarily creating value, but it's required? And so here's another way to look at it. If you think about this long line, in manufacturing they look at it as far as total production time. For our organizations and in Office Lean, you think about it for your process time. So in other words, let's think about hiring a new employee. The top line is how you currently hire a new employee. From the time that you decide we need a new employee and we create an ad and put it in the newspaper and create the job description, review the job description, etc., to the time that that person starts on the job. The blue line, the long line, represents all the steps involved. So in the blue, let's say the blue is looking at, excuse me, that's your actual value added time. That's putting the ad in the newspaper so that you can get recruits. That's reviewing resumes so that you can make a better selection. The red time is wasted time. It's getting 10 people to sign off on the job description before you post it. It's it's not being able to find all the resumes because you don't have a central place to store them when they come in from multiple sources like email or in the regular snail mail. Excuse me. And then the yellow would be the required. You know, you're required to have the person fill out the W-9s. You're required to file all the resumes received, etc. When you start looking at your whole process, there's areas where you can identify waste. And so the second bar, the shorter bar, represents, if you'll notice, a lot of the red has been taken out, which is waste. The yellow, which is the required, is still there, although it's a little shorter because you've taken out some of the waste. Even in the required, you've learned how to be more efficient in managing the required activities. And then you have a lot more of the blue time, which is value added. Now, hardcore Office Lean people they put no red in there at all. It is only required or value-added activities. I'm not quite that convinced, simply because we're human and no one's perfect. In an ideal world, absolutely, you only want value-added time and required time. So at this time, I'll stop and ask, are there any questions? Because this is it. Are you starting to think about what's wasteful, and what may be considered waste in your organizations? Are you understanding the difference between value-added and non-value-added activities? Because this is really the whole premise of Office Lean.
Well, I don't see any questions, and no one has their hand up. If you are typing, would you please click the hand raise button just so that I can see that you are typing? And if no one does, it looks like we don't have any questions.
Okay, we will continue. And also, if I'm talking too quickly or not quick enough, or if you can't hear me, please feel free to chat those things as well. So we've talked about identifying waste. There are two key types of waste. Tactical, meaning poor execution, and either were the instructions not clear, was there not a written process manual, did the employee or volunteer that was performing the task, is it their ability, or was it a misunderstanding and miscommunication, which happens a lot? And then definition waste. There are things that we do and we don't even realize that it's actually waste, or that we have self-imposed some requirements, until a third party may come in or a new employee may come in and say, why do you do it this way? For example, why do you require 3 signatures on every check? Okay, that's a little extreme, but that is an example of how some of the time we create our own waste through, that's the way we've always done it. Did you ever hear about the story where a lady was making a ham for a special occasion and her husband happened to walk into the kitchen when she was preparing the ham, and she cut both ends off and put it in the oven, and he said, honey, why did you cut both ends off of the ham before you stick it in the oven? She said, well, I don't know, that's what Mom always did. So she called her mom and she said, hey Mom, you know when we're making ham and we cut both ends off of the ham and we put it in the oven? She said, yes. She said, why do we do that? And her mom said, well, I don't know, let's call Nana. And so the woman called her grandmother and she said, Nana, she said, when I'm making a ham and when Mom's making a ham, we always cut each end off before we put it in the oven. Why is that? And Nana says, oh, honey, I can't believe you're still doing that. When I was cooking hams, the stoves weren't big enough for the ham to fit in, so we had to cut the ends off in order for it to fit. So generations have been wasting each ends of the ham simply because that's the way it was always done. That's what they saw and learned, and so that's what they continued to do, even though circumstances changed. That's an example of definition waste. Now there are many forms of office waste, and we will get into this more through all the webinars, actually, because throughout all these webinars, here again, our goal is to find waste and eliminate waste. And information, and this is a time where I'm willing to air my dirty laundry as well, information is a big one for me. I don't know how many times, how much time I waste looking for information or trying to find the right data, and that just, it drives me nuts, but I haven't got there yet. However, one of our webinars, 5S, is going to help us with that, and actually I will be learning that with you, or I should say I will be implementing it as you're learning it in one of our future webinars. And then double and triple checking, and this is big in nonprofits, is decision making by consensus. So you ask one person, then you ask another person, then you ask another person. And I'm not saying to avoid proofreading. Proofreading and double checking for quality is very important. But double and triple checking can also fall into waste if it isn't done correctly or effectively. Waiting. If you have employees that don't feel empowered to be able to make decisions and they're waiting for you to make all the decisions, that's a form of waste. And then sub-optimization. If there are volunteers, board members, staff, that they aren't being fully used, their mental, creative, physical abilities aren't being fully used, that's sub-optimization and missing a lot of opportunities by not taking advantage of the talents that is at your fingertips, utilizing your human resources that are available. And then sideline spreadsheets. If you have a central database but then you keep all these other spreadsheets because the database either doesn't do or you don't have the training to do what it needs to do, that's double entry, and that's also a lot of waste. As things happen in a nonprofit, new events unfold, maybe you've had a leadership change or you're going through strategic planning, or you've had a staff member leave and the other team members are wondering what's going to happen. There's a lot of waste around the water coolers because some of the time management, we're not as transparent as we should be in keeping people in touch, and so staff talk to each other, and then that's where the rumor mill starts to fly. And I'm not saying that it's not important for staff to have camaraderie and to be able to chat throughout the day, but I think management needs to really tune into, you know, do we need to talk to our employees about what's going on, because there's a lot of rumblings happening and some of the time the information just isn't correct. Swivel chair, that's a lot like double entering the data or moving a sheet, actual piece of paper from one place to another for someone to sign off that really doesn't have to happen. Another thing, when you think about leaving voicemails, go ahead and tell the person what you're calling for, and then some of the time they can answer in their voicemail back. That way, even if you play phone tag, you're still able to get the business conducted instead of calling and calling and calling. And then some other things that we talked about, maybe you have some self-imposed policies, and so employees find workarounds. And not only can that impact quality of your service, but it could also be inefficient. And then if you have a new employee come on board, how is that new employee trained for the processes when staff in reality are actually doing workarounds? I want all of you to know that in these webinars, Great Lakes Center for Youth Development is by far from perfect. And we are going through this the same as you are, and we see areas and know areas where we need to improve. So just because I'm talking about these things, it does not mean that we have everything figured out. So please feel free to ask questions. I want this to be a learning cohort. I want you to be able to implement things in your organization to be more efficient, and we're all in this together. And so we've looked at some forms of waste. We're identifying waste in our organization. Now, how do we eliminate them? This is a list of very high level how we eliminate. The one thing that I really want to focus on for an upcoming webinar, actually that will be the next two webinars, your cross-functional teams. And when you think about it, that could include your staff, volunteers, even some key customers, your board members. And if you have a trusting relationship with a funder or a donor that you could really be transparent with, having that person on your team would be a good, would be an advantage, and most likely you would get even additional buy-in from those donors because they know that you were working to be as efficient as possible. In the upcoming webinars, we will talk a lot more about how do we simplify processes, how do we eliminate rework, how to eliminate waste, and I will give you tools and theories that help to eliminate waste and implement Office Lean. But today I'm giving you just a broad overview. One of the tools that is actually one of the easiest to implement and one of the fastest is called Poka-Yoke. And that is somewhat of a slang term, and we have a Japanese employee, and I asked her what it meant, and she wasn't even sure actually what it means. So remember, this came from 5 generations of Japanese families, and so a lot of the terms will be in Japanese. We also need to remember that this is Japanese culture. So in essence, Poka-Yoke is dummy proofing. And again, that is not to be slanderous to your employees or to yourself, but it's really, why would you want to try to use your brain to create the same process over and over when you can just have it documented and it goes without really thinking that much? That way you save your brain for more important tasks. For example, in the left-hand side, thinking about child care providers and safety. Instead of always making sure that kids aren't around the electrical outlets, easy enough to get the little outlet covers. And so that's an example of not only quality service, it's a safety as well, and it's looking out for your employees and your customers. At the bottom is a gas cap tether, and I'm so glad they have these now. But remember the days, those of you that are maybe in my age group or older, remember the days before there was a gas cap tether and how many times you drove off without your gas cap being on and you had to replace it? Simple things like that. That is Poka-Yoke. I also have a screen like ordering online. If you're able to, I know Dell used to be the type, you couldn't advance to the next screen unless you had everything on the previous screen completed. So you don't have gaps in data because you don't allow there to be gaps in data. You have it required before you can go to the next step. Those are all examples of Poka-Yoke. And so while we want to call it dummy proofing, again, it's really thinking about, we want to set people up to succeed. And we want to make sure that they feel good about the job that they're able to do, and ourselves included. There's a story that in the mid-90s, a Toyota executive went and visited a General Motors plant. And General Motors at the end of the tour said, well, what do you think? And I'm paraphrasing here, but basically the Toyota executive said, in Japan, we hire, average employees, give them outstanding processes to create a quality product. Here in Detroit, you hire outstanding employees, give them so-so processes to create your product. And the executive even went so far to say, we will be the leader in the auto industry within 20 years. And you know what? They did. And here again, it's not slandering the people. It is looking at their culture as they want one in which the people can't fail. And that also helps the employees feel good about the job that they're doing because they know they are producing a quality process. That's also why you have happier employees as a result of Office Lean, because there's better understanding. There's processes in place. The processes are efficient. They make sense. They're practical. Employees don't have to figure out workarounds because all of that has already been eliminated. And you also implement things like Poka-Yoke so that you don't have the, ooh, or the Homer Simpson, duh, we should have caught that before. Does that make sense? And we have a question? Okay.
Yes, we have a question, and I don't know, Amy, if you'll know the answer to this. This is a really good question. What or how many UP organizations have already implemented Office Lean?
That's a really great question. The ones that I'm aware of, and so I'll qualify it by saying that, I know Northern Initiatives has, and the reason I know they have is I went to visit their office and they had all these whiteboards for metrics and calendaring and scheduling, and I said, oh, someone's been through Office Lean, and so we'll get into that in a later webinar. We have done it on a couple of our processes for saving time and reducing employee stress on some items, and I know BHK has done quite a bit in Office Lean, and an example, I know that they did office supplies. They changed the way they managed their inventory in office supplies and how they ordered office supplies, and they cut expenses, I want to say over 25% just in the first 6 months that they had implemented the new system. And so they've had some amazing results. They've also looked at their transportation, the way they handle transportation, because they have so many sites up in the Copper Country. And if there's others that are practicing Office Lean, there probably are. I'm just not aware of it.
That's all for questions.
Okay. How are we doing on time?
We have about 20 minutes left.
Okay. So next steps, and again, the key is you want to focus on small wins. Anytime you try to start making change, people tend to get uncomfortable. And so a couple of things that you want to remember as you start Office Lean. One, over-communicate to your staff that this is not about reducing staff. It's not about creating automation to be able to replace staff or to reduce staff. That's not it at all. And it's not because staff aren't capable. So you want to make sure staff understand that this is to help everyone feel better about the job that they're doing and to create things more efficiently, so the little rubs that happen throughout the day can hopefully be reduced and reduce stress and improve communications and have more money towards operating your programs or paying staff salaries, that type of thing. So as you start to think about this webinar today, I also want you to look for Poka-Yoke in your organization. What do you currently use? And then what are some opportunities for implementing? We have a very small one here at Great Lakes Center for Youth Development. We have security cameras because we're located in a former school building and they do youth programming. YMCA has a daycare in here. We have security, and so we have these cameras. Well, I kept forgetting to turn the TV off at night, the TV camera, and so we have big Post-it notes on the door as we leave that says TV off to remind us. So simple things like that, okay, that way I don't have to, it gets done and I don't really have to think about it because I have that reminder. We also have, as you know, we do a lot of workshops. We have a workshop box, and we have created, or are in the process of creating, a list. Everything that goes in the box and that the workshop presenter needs to take with them for every workshop. That way we don't get to a workshop and we're like, ooh, I forgot a flip chart or I forgot markers. So having the check sheet that's laminated that you can check off every time, assuming you follow the process, then we will have a quality, we'll have all the materials we need for a quality workshop. So think about the things that you currently use in your organization. See if things come to mind on how you have processes in place just so you, in a way, you don't have to, you do it a lot and you don't have to think about it, And if you have a new person come on board, or if something were to suddenly happen to you, someone else could easily fill in on these things because you have Poka-Yoke implemented. And then again, think about things that could be implemented. What are you spending brain power on that you do somewhat often, or at least more than just one time? What do you spend brain power on creating every time? That, do you create a new presentation every time when you need to do a meeting? If you're going to visit a donor, do you recreate the donor packet every time? Or do you have several already made up? Those are some examples for creating the efficiency and starting to implement Office Lean. And I put small wins up here because it can be very small. Something like a little tether on a gas cap, but that makes our lives so much easier. I also want to mention we have the upcoming webinars where we get into additional tools, really a little more of the meat around Office Lean and implementing it, and then also keeping track of your progress so that you gain even additional buy-in as people start to see how successful it is.
And just a reminder, if you do want to join us for those webinars, you have to register for each webinar individually. So just because you're registered for today's doesn't mean that you're registered for the additional 3. You can visit glcyd.org to sign up if you haven't already. I know it's kind of long and tedious to sign up for 4 different webinars, but that's the way GoToWebinar works, unfortunately. So you do have to sign up for each one, and all of the links are if you go to the GLCYD homepage, if you scroll down a little bit, there's information on the nonprofit conference. Right under that is the information on Office Lean, and you can register there.
Thank you, Victoria. And again, please keep in mind, this was the overview. This was, I didn't get into a lot of the theory, or I should say a lot of the tools, or really getting into the meat of things, because I wanted everyone to have the background. You know, you may say, if I were to just jump into this, you'd be like, well, why are there names like Poka-Yoke and Jakarta and Kaizen? Well, knowing the history helps, and understanding the Japanese culture of giving empowerment to the employees. And really, in Office Lean, it flips the pyramid. In typical U.S. office structure, you have your board, you have your executive, your CEO or executive director, and then you have staff. Well, in Office Lean and in the theory here, you flip that upside down, where you listen to the voice of the customer and the voice of employees first, because they're on the front lines. They see the more of the inefficiencies or the things that cause frustration. So they can provide a great deal more of input than the leadership or executive management team.
And we do have a couple questions from people about if you're not able to attend one of the webinars. We are recording them. I'm not sure if we'll be putting them on YouTube or if they'll be going on the BHK Center of Excellence site, or where the recording will be going. We're still working that out because they are pretty large recordings. So once we get that figured out, we'll let you guys know, and we will also send out a PDF of the PowerPoint so you guys can look through it. If there's anything that you saw today that you want to review and maybe ask a question about on September 4th, which is our next webinar, then you can make some notes on there and ask Amy then.
And I really would like this to be like a cohort learning session, and us starting to launch Office Lean together. And so I really encourage you and ask you to think about Poka-Yoke and what are you currently using, or what ideas have you had for making a few changes to incorporate Poka-Yoke in your organization. And please email those to me. And if it's okay. I will share it with the group. If you don't want me to share it with the group, then include that in your email. But this will also help me in tailoring the future webinars to what you want to learn and the things that are going well for you or where you have had challenges. So you do have, even if I can go so far to say, is a little homework or an assignment, or as some people like to call it, extended learning opportunity. You have an extended learning opportunity to look at Poka-Yoke or any of the things we talked about today. Even if it's bigger than Poka-Yoke, you find some waste that, okay, a simple solution like Poka-Yoke will not answer and get rid of this waste. Start documenting that and send it to me in an email. And start thinking about, okay, where do we see waste in the organization? Start talking to employees and volunteers about what is causing frustration in the organization. What do you see that's inefficient? What could we be doing better? And start documenting that. That's one of the first places to start. Look at various activities and think about, is that value added? Is that required? Or is it not value added? And so I really hope you are able to take this chance to have the webinar be more than filling your mind with a lot of information, but actually taking that next step to start taking action. And I put my email on the screen, and so I would love to hear from you. Are there any other questions? And I promise the next webinar will, like I said, we'll get into the meat of things, and it will be completely packed with information the full hour. This first one, I thought there may be more questions, and I was afraid of having too much information, and in hindsight, I guess I scaled it back too far.
All right, well, thank you all for coming, and I hope to see you guys again September 4th, which is the next webinar.
Oops.
Be sure that you head to glcyd.org and register if you have not, because like I said, you do have to register for each one individually.
And thank you to BHK Center of Excellence for providing these webinars.
All right, have a great Wednesday, everyone. See you in
Thank you.
2 weeks.